They thought she was just another helpless old woman on a quiet stretch of highway, a nobody they could bully with a badge and a gun. But when the bruised and battered 68-year-old made her one aloud phone call, those corrupt officers realized too late they had just summoned a monster. The humid Georgia air clung to the windshield of the 2014 Honda Accord like a second skin. Evelyn Wright, 68 years old and fresh off a 12-hour shift, volunteering at the community clinic, adjusted the air conditioning dial, though it did little to combat the sweltering July heat. Her hands, worn but steady, gripped the steering wheel at 10 and 2. The road winding through Pine Ridge County was notoriously dark, lined with ancient oaks that choked out the moonlight. Evelyn hated taking Route 9, but the interstate was backed up for miles, and all she wanted was a cup of tea and her favorite armchair. She never saw the cruiser tucked behind the abandoned Texaco station. The moment her taillights passed the rusted-out pumps, the darkness was violently shattered by the strobe of red and blue. Evelyn's heart performed a brief, frantic flutter against her ribs. She glanced down at her speedometer, 43 in a 45 zone, both hands firmly on the wheel. Registration current. Lord have mercy, just what I need tonight. She muttered gently, easing the Honda onto the gravel shoulder. She rolled down the window, the oppressive heat instantly invading the cool sanctuary of her car, and placed both hands visibly on the dashboard. A rule of survival she had learned decades ago. In the rearview mirror, two silhouettes stepped out of the cruiser. Officer Mitchell Hayes and his rookie partner, Officer Brian Dempsey. Hayes was a thick-necked man with a reputation in Pine Ridge that preceded him, a man who viewed his badge not as a shield, but as a license. He walked with a lazy, arrogant swagger, his hand resting casually on the butt of his sidearm. Dempsey trailed a step behind his eyes, darting nervously still, learning the ropes of his partner's twisted brand of law enforcement. Hayes stopped at Evelyn's window, shining a high-powered tactical flashlight directly into her eyes. License, registration, and proof of insurance. Hayes barked the beam of light, never wavering. Evelyn squinted, turning her face slightly to avoid the blinding glare. "Good evening, officer. May I ask why I was pulled over?" "I asked the questions," Hayes snapped, leaning closer, the smell of stale coffee and chewing tobacco radiating from him. "You swerved across the yellow line back there, looked impaired. Now hand over the documents before I haul you in for resisting." "I assure you, sir, I haven't swerved," Evelyn said, her voice trembling just a fraction, but maintaining its polite dignity. She reached slowly toward the glove compartment. "My registration is right here." "I didn't tell you to reach!" Hayes roared, his hand snapping out. He grabbed Evelyn by the wrist through the open window, his thick fingers digging into her fragile skin. "Officer, please, you're hurting me!" Evelyn cried out, dropping the papers. "Get out of the car, now!" Hayes unlatched the door from the inside, yanking it open. Before Evelyn could unbuckle her seatbelt, Hayes was pulling at her shoulder. The seatbelt locked, snapping her violently back against the seat, knocking the wind out of her. "Stop resisting!" Hayes shouted, a phrase he used mechanically to justify whatever came next. He reached across her, popping the seatbelt release, and then dragged the 68-year-old woman out of the car by her arm. Evelyn's knees buckled as her feet hit the loose gravel. She fell hard against the side of the Honda, her shoulder absorbing the impact. Dempsey, the younger officer, stood by the trunk, shifting his weight. "Mitch, maybe take it easy. She's just an old lady." "Shut your mouth, Dempsey, and cover me," Hayes growled. He spun Evelyn around, shoving her face first into the hood of her own car. The metal still radiating engine heat burned against her cheek. "I haven't done anything," Evelyn gasped, tears of pain and humiliation stinging her eyes. My son is in the military. I'm a good citizen. I don't care if your son is the president." Hayes sneered, grabbing her wrists and wrenching them behind her back with excessive force. Evelyn screamed as a pop echoed from her right shoulder, a rotator cuff tearing. The cold steel of the handcuffs bit brutally into her wrists, ratcheted down so tightly they instantly restricted her blood flow. Hayes roughly patted her down his hands, invasive and humiliating, before spinning her around. He shoved her forward toward the cruiser. Evelyn, disoriented and in excruciating pain, stumbled on the gravel. She fell hard, her knee tearing open on a jagged rock, her cuffed hands useless to break her fall. Hayes let out a short, cruel laugh. "Clumsy tonight, aren't we?" He grabbed her by the back of her blouse, hauling her up like a sack of trash, and shoved her into the back of the cruiser. Her head cracked against the doorframe, a dizzying wave of nausea washing over her as darkness edged into her vision. The ride to the Pine Ridge precinct was a blur of agony. Evelyn lay sideways on the hard plastic seat, her shoulder throbbing in time with her racing pulse, a slow trickle of blood making its way down her forehead from where she had hit the doorframe. She didn't speak. She didn't cry anymore. A cold, terrifying realization had settled over her. These men could kill her, right here in the dark, and no one would ever know the truth. When they arrived at the precinct, Hayes dragged her out, parading her through the fluorescent-lit bullpen. The desk sergeant, an older man named Peterson, barely looked up from his paperwork as Hayes tossed Evelyn's ID onto the counter. "Got a combative one here?" Hayes lied smoothly. "Reckless driving, suspected DUI, resisting arrest, assaulting an officer." Evelyn, bruised, bleeding, and shivering in the aggressive air conditioning of the station, looked at Peterson. "Please, he hurt me. I need a doctor." Peterson glanced at her injuries, then looked away, completely indifferent. "Put her in holding cell 4. Process her in the morning." Hayes marched her down a narrow cinder-block hallway, pushing her into a cramped, reeking cell. He removed the cuffs not out of mercy, but because procedure dictated it. Evelyn collapsed onto the thin-stained mattress on the floor, her right arm hanging uselessly at her side. "You get one phone call, sweetheart," Hayes sneered through the bars. "Make it count, because nobody is coming to save you from this." Hayes tossed a heavy corded phone through the slot in the bars. It clattered against the concrete floor. He turned and walked away, his heavy boots echoing down the hall. Evelyn lay in the dark for a long time, the pain in her shoulder radiating down to her fingertips. Her cheek was swelling, her knee caked in dried blood and gravel. She stared at the phone. Her hands shook violently as she reached for the receiver. She dialed a number she knew by heart, a number routed through 3 different switchboards, encrypted and monitored by the Department of Defense. She prayed he would answer. 2,000 miles away, inside the sterile subterranean briefing room of the Joint Special Operations Command, JSOC compound, at Fort Liberty, Master Sergeant James Wright was not thinking about home. James was a shadow. At 34 years old, he had spent the last decade operating in the world's most hostile environments as a Tier 1 operator in the 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta Force. He was built like a heavyweight fighter, moving with a terrifying predatory grace. His file was entirely redacted, heavily classified, and filled with commendations for operations the American public would never know existed. He was sitting at a gunmetal table field, stripping a customized SIG MCX rifle, listening to a high-value target briefing regarding a cartel extraction in Central America. The room was filled with 5 other men, all of them sporting tactical beards, worn eyes, and an air of lethal competence. Suddenly, the encrypted satellite phone resting on the table buzzed. It wasn't the operational line. It was his emergency personal relay. Only 3 people in the world had the clearance and the routing code to make that phone ring. James set down the firing pin. The room went silent. Every operator knew that a call on that line at 0100 hours was never good news. He picked it up. Right. There was a long silence, filled only by the crackle of static and the faint, unmistakable sound of a ragged breath. James. The voice was weak, trembling, and frail. James's blood ran cold. The man who had faced down heavily armed insurgents without a flinch suddenly felt a spike of pure adrenaline hit his heart. Mom. James stood up his chair, scraping violently against the concrete floor. The other operators in the room instantly snapped to attention, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. Mum, where are you? What's wrong? I'm in a jail, James. Evelyn sobbed, the emotional dam finally breaking. Pine Ridge County. They pulled me over. I didn't do anything, baby. I promise I didn't do anything. James closed his eyes, his grip on the phone tightening until the reinforced plastic groaned. Are you hurt? Did they hurt you? Evelyn hesitated, a quiet whimper escaping her lips. My shoulder. I think it's broken. My head is bleeding. They dragged me, James. They laughed. A profound, absolute silence descended over James Wright. It wasn't the hot, blinding anger of a civilian. It was the cold, clinical, and utterly devastating focus of an apex predator that had just located its prey. The temperature in the briefing room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The other operators watched him, their own expressions hardening as they caught the fragmented audio. What is the officer's name? James asked, his voice dropping an octave, becoming eerily calm. Hayes, Evelyn whispered. Mitchell Hayes. James, I'm scared. They said no one is coming to save me. They lied, James said softly. I'm coming, Mum. Do exactly what they say. Don't fight back. I will be there in a few hours. I love you. I love you too. The line went dead. James slowly lowered the phone. He looked across the table at his unit commander, Captain Miller. Miller had heard enough. Cartel op is delayed 48 hours pending satellite realignment anyway, Captain Miller said, without missing a beat, leaning back in his chair. Seems to me you have some emergency leave accumulated, Master Sergeant. Thank you, sir, James said, already turning toward the door. Right, Miller called out. James paused. Miller's eyes were deadly serious. You're a scalpel, James, not a sledgehammer. Remember where you are operating. I know exactly where I am operating, sir, James replied, his voice devoid of emotion. James walked down the corridor to the intelligence hub. He found William Hutchinson, a chief warrant officer and a cyber warfare savant who owed James his life from a botched exfil in Syria 2 years prior. Hutch, James said, standing in the doorway. Hutch turned away from his array of 6 glowing monitors. He took one look at James's face and immediately stopped chewing his gum. Who do we need to ruin? Pine Ridge County Police Department, Georgia. James said, stepping into the room and closing the door. Officer Mitchell Hayes. I want his service record. I want his financial records. I want the dash cam and body cam footage of an arrest made roughly 2 hours ago involving a female civilian, Evelyn Wright. And I want it before I hit the state line. Hutch's fingers were already flying across his mechanical keyboard, pulling up backdoor access points into municipal servers. Local PDs have garbage cybersecurity. I'll have their mainframe cracked before you start your engine. You driving? I'm flying to Atlanta, then driving, James said. He checked his watch. I'll be there by dawn. I'm pulling Hayes's file now, Hutch said, his eyes scanning the cascading data on his screen. Jesus! Write this guy as a piece of work. 3 excessive force complaints in the last 2 years, all swept under the rug by his precinct captain, Robert Jenkins. Civil suits settled out of court. The guy is a walking liability. He preys on transients and the elderly. Pull the footage, Hutch. Upload it to a secure cloud. Done. James. What are you going to do? James stopped at the door, his silhouette large and imposing against the fluorescent lights of the hallway. I'm going to teach Officer Hayes about consequence. By 0500 hours, the sun was just beginning to bleed, a bruised purple over the horizon of Pine Ridge County. The sleepy town was quiet, unaware of the storm that had just crossed its borders. James drove a rented, matte black Chevrolet Tahoe. He was dressed in plain clothes, dark denim tactical boots, and a fitted black Henley that barely contained the heavily corded muscle of his arms and chest. Hidden under a light canvas jacket was a custom Glock 9 Tismo, though James had no intention of using it. Bullets were too fast. Bullets were too kind. His Bluetooth earpiece beeped. It was Hutch. I got the footage, James. All of it. The dash cam and the body cam from the rookie Dempsey. Hutch's voice was uncharacteristically tight. James, it's bad. Really bad. He assaulted her unprovoked, tossed her around like a rag doll. It's felony assault, false arrest, kidnapping under color of law. Send it to my secure tablet, James said, his jaw locked so tight his teeth ached. Already there. Also, I took the liberty of sending a little package to the FBI field office in Atlanta, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, and 3 major news networks. Delayed delivery set for 0900 hours. You have until then to handle this locally before the feds swarm the place. Good work, Hutch. Go dark. James pulled the Tahoe into the gravel parking lot of the Pine Ridge Police Department. It was a single-story brick building, outdated and unimposing. The night shift was just preparing to hand over to the day shift. The cruiser Hayes drove was parked out front. James cut the engine. He sat in the silence of the cabin for exactly 60 seconds, watching the front doors of the station. He regulated his breathing, dropping his heart rate, locking away his rage in a steel vault in his mind. He wasn't going in as a furious son. He was going in as a Tier 1 operator, executing a hostage rescue. He stepped out of the Tahoe, the gravel crunching under his boots, and walked toward the entrance. It was time for the Pine Ridge PD to meet the monster they had summoned in the dark. James pushed open the heavy glass doors of the Pine Ridge Police Department. The air inside was stale, smelling intensely of old coffee industrial floor wax and deep-seated complacency. The desk sergeant Peterson was still sitting behind the scratched glass partition, nursing a styrofoam cup and staring blankly at a muted television screen playing an early morning infomercial. James didn't stop at the visitor window. He didn't ask for permission. He walked past it, his heavy boots thudding against the linoleum floor, directly toward the heavy wooden door, marked Authorized Personnel Only. Hey, hold it right there, Peterson barked, suddenly sitting up his chair, squeaking violently. You can't go back there. What's your business, pal? James completely ignored the desk sergeant. He gripped the door handle, planted his right boot squarely against the locking mechanism, and shoved with the force of a battering ram. The reinforced wood splintered instantly, the heavy deadbolt giving way, with a loud, violent crack that echoed through the entire station. The door slammed against the interior cinderblock wall, leaving a massive dent in the plaster. Peterson scrambled frantically for his radio, his cold coffee spilling in a brown puddle across his messy desk. We have a 1014 in the lobby. Suspect breaching the bullpen. I need backup. James stepped into the bullpen. There were 4 officers in the room, including the rookie Brian Dempsey, who was typing up a report at a small desk in the corner. But James's eyes locked immediately onto a thick-necked man pouring a fresh cup of coffee near the break room area. Mitchell Hayes. Hayes turned his face, instantly contorting in aggressive anger at the sudden intrusion. Who the hell are you? Get down on the ground, right now. I said get on the ground. Hayes dropped his ceramic mug. It shattered into dozens of pieces, hot, dark liquid splashing over his polished black boots. He reached instinctively for his service weapon, strapped to his hip. He was tragically too slow. James crossed the 30 feet of the bullpen in an absolute blur of calculated motion. Before Mitchell Hayes could even unclip the safety retention strap on his holster, James was inside his guard. James's left hand clamped fiercely over Hayes's gun hand, pinning it firmly and painfully into the holster. Simultaneously, James drove the heel of his right hand upward, striking Hayes squarely under the chin with devastating precision. The blow was masterfully calculated. It was not nearly enough force to kill, but it was exactly enough kinetic energy to rattle the brain violently inside the skull. Hayes's eyes rolled back briefly, a flash of white showing, and his heavy knees instantly buckled beneath him. Before the corrupt officer could hit the linoleum floor, James grabbed him tightly by the heavy fabric of his tactical vest, lifted his 240-pound frame completely off the ground, and slammed him forcefully backward onto the nearest wooden desk. Dual monitors crashed to the floor, shattering screens. Keyboards snapped in half under the immense weight. "Hands where I can clearly see them," Dempsey screamed, drawing his weapon, his hands shaking so violently the barrel bobbed up and down. The other 2 officers in the room also drew their Glock pistols, shouting chaotic, overlapping commands that filled the room with deafening noise. James didn't even bother to look at them. He stood menacingly over Hayes, his thick forearm pressing firmly and relentlessly against the officer's throat, cutting off his airway, just enough to induce a primal panic. "My name is James Wright," James said, his voice echoing cleanly through the frozen, chaotic bullpen. It was utterly devoid of hot anger. Instead, it was flat, clinical, and completely terrifying. "Evelyn Wright is my mother. And you have exactly 10 seconds to tell me where she is before I permanently crush your trachea." Hayes gagged loudly, his face rapidly turning a deep shade of crimson. His hands clawed uselessly at James's immovable forearm. The sheer terrifying strength pinning him down was something the local bully had never encountered in his entire life. He was entirely used to terrorizing helpless victims. He was absolutely not used to fighting apex predators. "Stand down immediately," a booming voice echoed from the hallway corridor. Captain Robert Jenkins emerged from his private office, his face purple with indignant rage, his hand resting cautiously on his gun belt. "Drop him right now, son, or my men will put you in the ground." James slowly turned his head to look dead at Jenkins. He did not release a single ounce of pressure on Hayes's throat. "Captain Robert Jenkins, your department unlawfully arrested a 68-year-old woman at 2200 hours last night. She was brutally assaulted, maliciously denied basic medical care, and thrown into a concrete cell without even being formally booked." "She actively resisted arrest," Jenkins fired back defensively, though a highly noticeable flicker of deep uncertainty crossed his shifting eyes. "Now step away from my officer before things get lethal." "Brian Dempsey," James said smoothly, finally looking directly at the young rookie holding the trembling gun. "You were standing right there. Did she resist?" Dempsey swallowed exceptionally hard, his wide eyes darting nervously between his furious captain and the terrifying military operator, systematically dismantling his senior partner. I... Your body cam footage explicitly says otherwise, Brian," James stated with chilling calmness. "In fact, I have it right here." With his free hand moving deliberately slowly, so as not to spook the armed men, James reached deep into his canvas jacket. "He's reaching for a weapon," one of the other seasoned officers yelled in pure panic. "Do it and you die before your finger pulls the trigger," James warned, his voice cutting through the rising panic like a serrated ice blade. He slowly pulled out his highly secure military tablet and casually tossed it onto the adjacent metal desk. The screen was brilliantly alive, playing the crystal-clear high-definition video downloaded directly from Dempsey's own chest camera. The horrifying video plainly showed Hayes violently yanking Evelyn from the small car, maliciously slamming her face, first onto the hot hood, and viciously bending her arm backward until the sickening, audible pop of her shoulder echoed. Evelyn's desperate cries of pain filled the suddenly dead-silent police station. Jenkins stared blankly at the glowing screen, the healthy color draining completely from his weathered face. He looked down at Hayes, who was still gasping desperately for air under James's iron grip. "I have already forwarded that exact footage," James stated clearly, his voice devoid of any hesitation in the tense room. "Along with Officer Mitchell Hayes's entirely unredacted internal affairs file, your specific department's long history of suppressed excessive force complaints, and Hayes's private bank records showing massive unexplained cash deposits over 3 years. It is currently sitting in the inbox of the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, the FBI field office in Atlanta, and the main investigative desks of national networks." The service guns pointed directly at James began to lower slowly, one by one. Dempsey quickly holstered his heavy weapon, stepping far back. A look of profound, utter disgust washed over his youthful face as he looked down at his bleeding partner. "Now," James said gently, leaning dangerously close to Hayes's purpling, sweaty face, "where is my mother being held?" Hayes finally managed a weak, pathetic wheeze through his crushed windpipe. "Holding cell number 4. James instantly released him completely. Hayes rolled clumsily off the shattered desk, crashing heavily to the dirty floor. He gasped hungrily for sweet oxygen, clutching his deeply bruised throat in pure agony. James turned his broad back completely on the heavily armed men, entirely unconcerned for his own personal safety. He walked calmly down the narrow cinder-block hallway. Captain Jenkins did not dare stop him. Not a single officer moved a muscle. They were completely paralyzed by the horrifying realization that their isolated, corrupt fiefdom had just been utterly annihilated by a deadly, silent ghost. James quickly found holding cell 4. He snatched the heavy set of brass keys, hanging carelessly on a wooden peg near the metal door, and quickly unlocked the rusting iron grate. Evelyn was huddled miserably in the darkest corner on the freezing floor, shivering uncontrollably. Her right arm hung awkwardly at a grotesque, unnatural angle. Her beautiful face was massively swollen with dark, ugly bruising, blooming rapidly across her delicate cheekbone. Dried, crusted blood heavily matted her beautiful silver hair. When she weakly looked up and saw his familiar silhouette, she let out a broken, agonizing sob. James instantly dropped to his knees. His cold, tactical, emotionless military facade completely shattered into a million pieces. He reached out quickly, his massive, scarred hands incredibly gentle and tender, as he softly touched her uninjured left shoulder. "I am right here, Mum. I have got you. You are completely safe now forever. James," she wept openly, leaning heavily forward and burying her bruised face deep into his strong chest. "You actually came. I told you I always would," he whispered softly, gently, kissing the top of her bleeding head. He carefully and methodically slid his strong left arm smoothly under her weak legs and his right arm securely around her back, lifting her completely up as effortlessly as if she were a small, delicate child. "Let us get you out of this filthy, disgusting place." James easily carried his injured mother out of the dark cell block and back into the brightly lit bullpen. The large room was deathly quiet. Hayes was now sitting slumped in a rolling chair, holding a makeshift ice pack to his swollen face, glaring intensely at James with venomous hatred. Jenkins was frantically dialing his secure desk phone, sweating profusely and looking utterly panicked. As James finally reached the shattered lobby doors, The loud wail of heavy sirens suddenly filled the morning air outside. But they were absolutely not local county police sirens. They were the deep, commanding horns of heavy federal government vehicles. 3 massive SUVs bearing official United States government plates tore aggressively into the gravel lot, their heavy tires screeching loudly. Before the large vehicles even fully stopped moving, heavy doors flew open instantly. A dozen highly trained tactical agents wearing dark windbreakers swarmed the main entrance, heavily armed with compact rifles and moving with precise tactical coordination. A tall, imposing man with neat silver hair and a very sharp, expensive suit walked in confidently behind them. Special Agent in Charge, Harrison Cole. Nobody moves a single muscle, federal agents. Keep your hands completely away from your gun belts. The lead tactical squad agent shouted at the top of his lungs. Cole completely bypassed the bewildered cops and walked straight up to James, who was tenderly holding his bleeding mother. Cole closely examined Evelyn's severe injuries, his strong jaw tightening visibly in pure anger. "Master Sergeant Wright?" Agent Cole asked respectfully. "Yes," James replied stoically. "We successfully received your data package. I deeply apologize it took us this long to arrive. Paramedics are pulling up behind us." Cole slowly turned his cold gaze toward the messy bullpen. "Mitchell Hayes," Agent Cole barked sharply, his voice booming with unquestionable authority. "You are officially under federal arrest for severe deprivation of civil rights, under color of law, aggravated felony assault, and federal kidnapping. Captain Jenkins, you are also being detained, pending a massive federal investigation into systemic department corruption." Federal tactical agents instantly swarmed Hayes, slamming him forcefully against the exact same broken desk. The sharp, metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs echoing loudly was beautiful. Paramedics rushed in, and James gently laid his mother on the clean stretcher. As they wheeled her to the ambulance, she squeezed his hand. "You are a good boy, James." The monster had done his job perfectly. Now he was happily just a devoted son, keeping his beloved mother safe. Did you feel the intense justice in this incredible story? No one should ever abuse their power, especially against the innocent and vulnerable. If you loved seeing this corrupt officer face the ultimate reckoning from a true hero, please hit that like button, share this video with your friends to spread awareness, and absolutely subscribe to our channel for more amazing, thrilling, real-life, dramatic stories every single week.